I studied nationalism in London at London School of Economics, and obviously nationalism. Myself being a nationalist, had a great opportunity to study the variety of theories of nationalism, and it was very important for me, for shaping my view of history, of modern history especially. And obviously the history of Republican Turkey, it's a prime example of state shaping the nation, or creating the nation out of the milieu of ethnic, very rich ethnic milieu of different ethnicities becoming Turks. But I continued my studies with William Hale, who was one of the prominent Turkologists at the SOAS, at School of Oriental and African Studies, and he convinced me, obviously, to further my study of Turkish history and Turkish politics. And I completed my Ph.D. at SOAS, and it resulted in a book which was published by Routledge, by a British publisher in 2009. It was dedicated to the very contemporary issues. Specifically, the book is titled Turkey's Entente with Israel and Azerbaijan, and it dwells primarily on this period in contemporary history of Turkey where the three countries which were united from the period of 1992, the end of the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union, brought a completely great shift, geopolitical shift in the whole region. And what was called by George Bush Sr., the so-called the expanded Middle East, came into play, and the great powers, especially the United States, start playing in this, reshaping this region in some ways. So the smaller countries, which were so pro-Western countries such as Turkey and Israel, they needed to find a place, a niche in this new architecture. And they found Azerbaijan, which just gained the independence after the long period of being suppressed as an independent state. Obviously, it had independence two-year independence, right, of the Bolshevik Revolution. But what we're thinking of Azerbaijan as independent states, obviously post-1992, and those three. And my book was essentially dwelling on this interesting mix based on very particular pillars, which I call the pillars, which brought them together until the period of 2005, when I think that the AK Party's leadership became consolidated, and it completely reshaped the political, social dynamic in Turkey. But prior to that, following the Atatürkist ideals, where the military, as the guardians of the republic, of the secular republic, were predominant in the political. Sometimes, sometimes they were up front, and sometimes were working behind the scenes. But they were impacting greatly the Turkish politics, as we know. When I'm talking about when they were very obvious, we're talking about the period of military coups. But even during the period after the military coups, through the mechanism of National Security Council, they were able to basically to direct, to guide the foreign and domestic policies in Turkey. So, and Israel is also another example of secular state, modern young state, which is obviously pro-Western and has a lot of leverage, as we know, in Washington through the Jewish lobby. And not to mention Azerbaijan, a young country which just came into being in 1992 as an independent state, which has a lot of wealth in its oil and gas and natural resources, and they found themselves as a perfect match. And they were multi-layered cooperation, stretching from energy to military to intelligence to basically geopolitical cooperation, because they were in step with the United States. And they were essentially representing the interests of the United States. But by the same token, when I said that they found their niche, that means that they used, obviously, United States for their own national interests. It's not only one-way street here. So that it's in this book was raised some interest, and but obviously the period of when 2002 November elections, there was such a turn in Turkish basically in Turkish society, with emergence of a party which posed itself as the white party, which means the pure, free of corruption, free of the politics, the dirty politics of 1980s, where there were all those coalitions were fallen, and there was so much infighting within even the coalition. So the AK party is emerging as a pure party, which hopefully the hope was that will raise the level of democracy, the level of the road to Europe will be open. But obviously the leadership of the party represented the spin-off of the old really Islamist parties, and so that's an interesting mix of Islamist background with the new vision for new Turkey, more democratic Turkey, as it was declared by, and it was the period of, definitely there were a lot of reforms which came with the emergence of Erdogan. He liberalized a lot of areas in Turkish in the body politic, but obviously the another side, another theme which emerges, another trope which emerges with AK party's consolidation of power. It's what is become known as neo-Ottomanism or Yeni Osmanlıçılık. That was a very powerful political sort of doctrine, which some analysts believe that it's exaggerated. There is no such a cohesive body of thought or body of ideology. But I choose to differ, but I believe obviously that it's not the neo-Ottomanism does not emerge with Erdogan. It obviously it emerges with in much earlier period when Turgut OZAL was a first prime minister and then president, and it was his search for unity in Turkish society, which was just thread to pieces by so many military coups, by the suppression of Kurdish ethno-nationalism, by separatism, by the emergence of PKK and its terrorist activity. So Turgut OZAL, being of Kurdish descent, he wanted to find a unity, and obviously he looked to the past to find some models for the unity in the Turkish society, and obviously this unity it goes back to the Ottoman period, and he attracted a group of so-called second republicans, young intellectuals, which were formerly very radically to the left, especially Cengiz Jandar was the prime example. And he invited them, and Turgut OZAL wanted to find some new ideas, some new political slogans or political models which he can use in order to find this unifying theme. And Cengiz Jandar, in my conversations, he said that he was one of the people who kind of dropped this idea. Maybe there is such a thing as a revival because of such a shift in the neighborhood, in Turkish neighborhood. It needs to find some kind of image which it can project as a soft power, and become not a second or third violin in the region, but become the first violin. And the only pretext, it would be historical pretext of the domination of the region for 500 years. And but with the death of Turgut OZAL, it was this concept kind of went underground, but it was not lost on people who like Erdogan and Davutoglu, that it's a very rich source of ideological cohesion for society. It can bring some peace, among the secular and among the religious. That was just that was a project. And obviously he wanted to, and that gave him, Erdogan, as a religious person, a reason to liberalize the public space. It gave them a reason, and he would refer to back to the period of Ottoman Empire and say that society was at had the just order, adil düzen, and it was the sort of the best mix, which is naturally, historically, it's an evolution of Turkish society, which needs to be restored. This balance has to be restored, and that was the main sort of concept. And obviously the Davutoglu, which he in his book the Strategic Depth, he outlined how this can be operationalized, how it can be put into action. This kind of very vague ideas, how they can become the source of the foreign policy for Turkish Republic. But that brought about the so-called zero problems policy. It was essentially more sort of next stage in the development of this idea of Yeni Osmançılık, because the idea was to present Turkey as a country, as a central country, between East and West, as a central country between the Turkic world and the Arab world, as a central country on a global scale. Unfortunately, I think that this policy brought Turkey into entanglements, as we know, especially with Arab Spring, into the place where Turkey is in much worse shape than before this policy was brought into action. And it brings me back just to the old adage of Atatürk: peace at home, peace abroad, and peace at home. Meaning to say that the very disentanglement of which was Atatürk set as a prescription for foreign policy of Turkey, I think served Turkish Republic much better. I think that Davutoglu, primarily as academician, he is the strong believer in his own view, in his own theoretical view, in his own political view, in his own foreign policy as a project not limited by short-termism or the concerns of appealing to the popular interests of the popular to carry the favor with population, but he thought it as a sort of in more grandiose terms. So I think that Davutoglu will never discard this, which might bring or not bring him into conflict with Erdogan as he stands in front of the elections and facing such dire consequences, like in Syria, in Iraq, which directly undermined in most drastic way the security in Turkey. So it's a big question in my mind whether Erdogan will continue in this along this path or he will abandon Davutoglu. I think Davutoglu will not because it's his life project. It's not for him. It's not just a fashion or sort of political sort of thing. It's much more his deep belief that this is the proper kind of logical historical progression. And that's that. Turkey, obviously that after the AK Party came to power, there was a lot of premonition, a lot of foreboding among the elites close to leadership to Ilham Aliyev about the religious turn in Turkey, and there was a lot of tension in the period, especially followed by the attempt after the Zurich protocols, after signing the Zurich protocols, that Turkey is trying to appease Armenia at the price of Azerbaijan. So there was a tremendous amount of problematic sort of development when Turkey, following the zero free policy of its neighbors, tried to raise its relationship with Armenia to a certain level, which obviously failed at the very vocal protest of the Azerbaijani leadership, and Davutoglu had to go and to calm them down. So it was not like a rose path since AK Party came to power. So the relation between even Azerbaijan, two brothers, to one nation divided into states, as the slogan goes. So there was certainly some problems in this, but the reality set in, the pragmatic calculation and economic interests of two countries absolutely, basically they coincide completely. And the energy projects, the concept of energy hub, which was the ongoing policy of Turkey since the collapse of the Soviet Union, was the most important project, and Azerbaijan was absolutely instrumental for this to occur, for this to materialize. And Azerbaijan realizes that no matter what, there is the only outlet for the petrochemicals to the west will pass through Turkey. So there was no alternative, and so the realism won the day, and we see that now Azerbaijan has become a major investor in Turkish energy projects, and as an investor it becomes an influential factor in Turkey itself. So obviously it shows that there is stability and there is a sense of security that Azerbaijan is investing in this country, and it means that the Azerbaijani leadership believes in its progression in this direction. However, some unease might still remain, even among the closest, but it will be overruled by the pragmatic calculations and realpolitik. It certainly will win the day. Surprisingly, despite the deterioration of the drastic deterioration of relationship, I think Israel and Turkey also are by realpolitik, not maybe by the will of their leadership, but they are set in the region where they will inevitably their interests concur, rather than, because they are both pro-Western countries, unless Turkey will drastically reshape its constitution in some particular articles will be dropped. I mean anything can happen, obviously, because it was Turkey over this short period of time passed through very dramatic change, internal change. So, and the religious element become much predominant in the public sphere, and it has consequences. But unless there is a constitutional change, which we know about, I mean it remains, and the NATO membership will constrain Turkish ability to play maybe their own independent game, unless it obviously leaves NATO. And Israel as a pro-Western country, as a country which is extremely important for the Western alliance. It depends. There is like codependence. Obviously, it depends. You can say on the United States, but the United States also in some ways depends on Israel, which we can talk about. So, and those two countries will inevitably will be faced with the maybe geopolitical reality. They would have to patch their differences, but it might be not within foreseeable future. I believe that it's, to a greater degree, it's to the political leadership of Turkey how it wants to play this, because a lot of toes have been stepped on both sides between Israel and Turkey. A lot of feelings have been hurt on both sides. There are a lot of negative dynamic among the leadership of both Turkey and Israel. So it might simply affect that and basically against the best the reason, against what Aristotle would say the middle way. I mean the extreme might prevail, but it's unfortunate, but I mean, like in the best case, the rational approach will prevail, and these issues can be solved, obviously, if there is a political will. It's not a question of if, it's only a question of if there is a political will on our side of Erdogan, which he sometimes fails to show, and obviously Israel also is very wary. Is not, you know, playing along with a lot of Turkish demands, so that creates its own dynamic.